How God deals with those who hurt you. The betrayal cuts deep. The pain feels raw. And in those dark moments, you wonder, where is God in all of this? Your heart races as memories flood back, of trust broken, of relationships shattered, of wounds that still feel fresh. You've tried to move forward, but the questions linger. Why did God allow this? Why do they seem to prosper while you suffer? But what if I told you that right now, in this very moment, God is working in ways you cannot see? What if the very pain that threatens to break you is being woven into something far greater than you could imagine? From the depths of a prison cell to the heights of a palace. From the wilderness of betrayal to the promised land of purpose. God's justice moves in ways that will astound you. And today, we're going to discover exactly how He deals with those who hurt His children. This isn't just another message about forgiveness. This is about understanding God's profound justice system, one that operates beyond human timing, beyond human understanding, and brings forth restoration in ways you never thought possible. Join me as we uncover how God sees, acts, and transforms the very situations meant to destroy you into stepping stones for your destiny. Have you ever felt invisible in your pain? Like your tears fall silently while the world keeps turning, oblivious to your suffering? Maybe you've watched as those who hurt you continue their lives, seemingly untouched by the devastation they've left behind. You might even question if God notices at all. But here's a truth that will shake your foundation. The eyes of the Lord are in every place, beholding the wicked and the righteous. These words from Proverbs 15:3 aren't just poetic language. They're a powerful reality that changes everything about your situation. Let me take you back to a woman who understood this deeply. Hagar, a servant girl, found herself abandoned in the desert, pregnant and alone. Cast out by those who should have protected her, she had every reason to believe she was forgotten. But in that moment of absolute despair, something extraordinary happened. God didn't just see her. He met her right there in the wilderness. He called her by name. He knew her story. He had a plan for her life that would extend far beyond her current pain. Think about that. The God who crafted the universe, who holds the stars in place, sees every detail of your situation. He witnesses every betrayal, every lie spoken against you, every manipulative move made in the shadows. Nothing escapes His notice. Not the midnight tears you cry, not the anxiety that grips your heart, not even the carefully masked schemes of those who wronged you. But here's what's even more profound. God doesn't just observe passively. Right now, in ways you cannot see, He is actively working. Like a master chess player, He's orchestrating moves that will not only bring justice, but will transform your pain into purpose. Those who hurt you might think they're writing the end of your story, but God is quietly penning chapters they never saw coming. Remember this: in your darkest moments, when it feels like no one sees or understands, you are never alone. The same God who found Hagar in the desert sees you. The same God who counted David's tears in the wilderness knows your pain. And just as He did for them, He is weaving your story into something far more beautiful than you can imagine. Your situation isn't a blind spot in God's vision. It's a focal point of His attention. And as we're about to discover, His response to those who hurt you will reveal a justice system far more profound than anything this world could devise. Why do the wicked prosper? It's a question that has echoed through the centuries, from ancient psalms to modern prayers. When you see those who betrayed you climbing the corporate ladder, building their dream homes, or flaunting their seemingly perfect lives on social media, something deep within you cries out for justice. But here's a revolutionary truth. God's justice operates on a different timeline, with a precision that human courts could never match. Let me share with you one of the most extraordinary stories of divine timing, the story of Joseph. Picture this: a 17-year-old boy, betrayed by his own brothers, stripped of his colorful coat, and sold into slavery like a piece of property. If anyone had reason to question God's justice, it was Joseph. But his story was far from over. Thrown into an Egyptian prison on false accusations, Joseph could have become bitter. He could have given up on God's justice. Instead, something remarkable happened in that dungeon. While his accusers walked free, while his brothers prospered back home, God was orchestrating a plan so magnificent it would save nations. 13 years. That's how long Joseph waited. 13 years of slavery, false accusations, and imprisonment. To human eyes, it looked like justice had failed. But God was positioning every piece perfectly. In one day, just one day, Joseph went from prisoner to prime minister. The same hands that wore chains now wore Pharaoh's ring. The same voice that cried out from a pit now spoke words that saved countless lives. But here's the most powerful part of Joseph's story. When his brothers finally stood before him, trembling with fear of retribution, Joseph understood something profound about God's justice. "You meant evil against me," he told them, "but God meant it for good." This wasn't just forgiveness. It was a revelation of how God's justice transforms everything it touches. Think about your situation right now. Those who hurt you might seem to be writing their own success story, but God is the author of the final chapters. Like Joseph, what looks like a pit might actually be a passage to your purpose. What feels like a prison might be preparation for your platform. God's justice isn't just about punishment. It's about positioning. While you're counting the days, He's orchestrating decades. While you're seeing closed doors, He's preparing open heavens. Every tear, every betrayal, every moment of suffering is being woven into a tapestry of redemption so beautiful it will take your breath away. Your breakthrough might not come tomorrow. It might not come next week. But know this: God's justice is never late. Like a master watchmaker, He knows exactly when every gear needs to turn, when every hand needs to move. And when His justice finally unfolds, it will be so perfect, so complete, that you'll understand why every moment of waiting was necessary. Remember, in God's courtroom, the final verdict isn't just about setting things right. It's about setting things gloriously, unimaginably better than they were before. Your story isn't over. The Judge of all the earth is still at work, and His justice will be worth the wait. When someone wounds you deeply, your heart immediately presents you with two paths. The first one beckons with the sweet promise of revenge, planning how to strike back, fantasizing about their downfall, or at least hoping they'll get what they deserve. It's natural. It's human. But there's another path, one that seems impossibly difficult at first. The path of forgiveness. "Vengeance is mine, I will repay," says the Lord. These words from Romans 12:19 aren't just a gentle suggestion. They're a profound invitation to freedom. But what does this actually mean in real life, when the pain is raw and the injustice screams for immediate action? Let's look at one of the most dramatic examples in history: David and Saul. Imagine being in David's position, anointed by God Himself to be king, yet hunted like an animal by the very man you loyally served. Saul's jealousy drove him to throw spears at David, to chase him through mountains, to slaughter entire villages that helped him. David had every human right to strike back. Then came that moment in the cave at En-Gedi. Saul, completely vulnerable, walked right into David's hiding place. David's men whispered excitedly, "This is your chance. God has delivered your enemy into your hands." The opportunity for revenge was perfect. One swift stroke of the sword would end years of running, years of injustice. But David chose differently. Standing there with Saul's cloak in his hands, having cut off just a corner to prove how close he'd been to ending Saul's life, David demonstrated something revolutionary about trusting God's justice. "I will not stretch out my hand against the Lord's anointed," he declared. In that moment, David wasn't just sparing Saul, he was surrendering his right to revenge into God's hands. This wasn't weakness, this wasn't passivity. This was David understanding a profound truth. When we try to dispense justice ourselves, we often create bigger wounds. We become trapped in a cycle of retaliation that consumes us. But when we step back and let God handle those who hurt us, we position ourselves for something far greater than revenge. We position ourselves for restoration. Look at how God handled Saul. The man who spent years trying to kill David ultimately fell by his own choices, his own fears, his own rebellion against God. David didn't have to lift a finger. He didn't have to scheme or plot. By choosing forgiveness over revenge, he kept his own heart pure and let God be the judge. This doesn't mean you pretend the hurt never happened. It doesn't mean you have to put yourself in position to be wounded again. Forgiveness isn't about denying reality. It's about denying the hurt the power to control your future. It's about trusting that God sees, God knows, and God will deal with it in His perfect way and time. When you choose forgiveness, you're not letting anyone off the hook. You're moving them from your hook to God's hook. And His justice, unlike ours, is perfect, complete, and transforms not just situations, but souls. There's a profound irony about unforgiveness that most people never realize. When you refuse to forgive, you become a prisoner of the very person who hurt you. Every time you replay the offense in your mind, every moment spent plotting revenge, every bitter thought, these are chains that bind you, not them. The person who wounded you might be living their best life, completely unaware, while you're trapped in a prison of pain that you yourself are guarding. But there's a key that unlocks these chains, and it was demonstrated most powerfully on a Roman cross 2,000 years ago. Picture this scene. Jesus, hanging between heaven and earth, his body torn by betrayal and brutality. He had every right to call down legions of angels. He could have turned those nails into burning flames against his accusers. Instead, he spoke words that would forever change how we understand true freedom. "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." This wasn't just a noble gesture, it was a revelation of power. In that moment of ultimate injustice, Jesus demonstrated that forgiveness isn't weakness. It's the ultimate strength. He showed us that even in our deepest wounds, we have the power to choose freedom over bondage, release over resentment. Think about a time when someone deeply hurt you. Maybe it was a betrayal that blindsided you, a rejection that shattered your confidence, or words that cut to your very core. Now, imagine setting down that heavy burden of resentment. Imagine stepping out of the shadow of that pain into the light of freedom. This is what forgiveness offers you. Not just release for the offender, but liberation for your own soul. But let's be honest. Forgiveness isn't a one-time decision. It's a journey. Sometimes you have to forgive the same offense multiple times, especially when the memories resurface. Yet each time you choose forgiveness, you're not just releasing the other person, you're releasing yourself. You're declaring that their actions will no longer have power over your peace, your joy, your future. When you forgive, something miraculous happens. The energy you spent nursing wounds becomes fuel for your dreams. The mental space occupied by bitter memories becomes room for new visions. The emotional weight of resentment transforms into wings of freedom that lift you higher than you ever imagined possible. Remember, forgiveness doesn't mean what they did was okay. It doesn't mean you have to restore the relationship or put yourself in position to be hurt again. It simply means you're choosing to step out of the role of victim and into the role of victor. You're choosing to trust God's justice rather than carry the exhausting burden of being both victim and executioner of justice yourself. The freedom that comes through forgiveness is your divine right, purchased at the highest price on that cross. Don't let another day of your life be controlled by those who hurt you. Choose freedom. Choose forgiveness. Choose to live unburdened by the weights that were never yours to carry. What if I told you that your current pain isn't a detour? It's actually part of the divine roadmap. This might sound counterintuitive, even difficult to accept, but some of God's greatest masterpieces began with what looked like disasters. Consider Job, a man who lost everything in a single day: his children, his wealth, his health, even his reputation. His suffering was so intense that his own wife advised him to curse God and die. But in the depths of his agony, something remarkable was taking place. Job's suffering wasn't punishment, it was preparation. The Bible tells us that the Lord restored Job's fortunes and gave him twice as much as he had before. But notice this crucial detail. This restoration came after he had prayed for his friends, the very ones who had judged and misunderstood him in his suffering. Remember Joseph? We talked about his journey earlier, but there's a deeper layer to his story. Those years in the pit and the prison weren't just about waiting for justice. They were God's university of character. Every betrayal, every false accusation, every lonely night was shaping him into someone who could handle the weight of national leadership. What looked like rejection was actually direction. What felt like punishment was actually preparation. This pattern repeats throughout Scripture and throughout history. God often uses suffering as soil for something extraordinary to grow. It's like a master sculptor who sees the masterpiece in the marble before the first chip is made. Every strike of the chisel, though painful, reveals more of the intended beauty. Think about the areas where you've been wounded. Those relationship betrayals, they're teaching you discernment. That financial loss? It's developing resourcefulness. That public humiliation? It's building unshakable confidence that isn't dependent on others' opinions. God isn't just planning to restore what was lost. He's using these very experiences to equip you for a level of impact you couldn't have achieved without them. But here's the key. This transformation happens only when we stop fighting the process and start embracing the purpose. When we shift from asking, "Why is this happening to me?" to "What are you developing in me through this?" We position ourselves for the kind of restoration that doesn't just return us to normal, it catapults us into extraordinary. Remember, God's restoration isn't just about replacing what was lost. When He restores, He upgrades. He doesn't just give back the years the locusts have eaten. He transforms those years into wisdom, strength, and authority that money can't buy and shortcuts can't create. Your suffering isn't random, and it certainly isn't the end of your story. It's the foundation upon which God is building something far greater than you can imagine. Trust the process. Embrace the preparation. Your double portion is coming. As we come to the end of this journey, let's pause for a moment and let these truths sink deep into your heart. We started with that burning question. What does God do when people hurt you? Now you know. He sees every tear, records every injustice, and weaves every painful moment into a tapestry of triumph. Remember this. God's justice isn't just about making wrong things right. It's about making broken things beautiful. When others betrayed Joseph, God was preparing a savior for nations. When Saul hunted David, God was shaping a king. When Job lost everything, God was setting the stage for double restoration. And right now, in your situation, God is doing the same. Those who hurt you don't have the final word over your life. Their actions, intended for evil, are being transformed by a God who specializes in turning crucifixions into resurrections, wounds into wisdom, and pain into power. So I ask you, will you trust His process? Will you release your right to revenge and embrace the freedom of forgiveness? Will you let go of the chains of bitterness that bind you to those who hurt you? The choice is yours. You can remain trapped in the prison of past pain, or you can step into the freedom God offers. You can keep rehearsing the hurt, or you can start rehearsing your comeback story. You can stay fixated on those who wounded you, or you can fix your eyes on the God who promises to restore double for your trouble. Remember, your story isn't over. God sees you. He hasn't forgotten you. And His justice, when it comes, and it will come, won't just balance the scales. It will tip them overwhelmingly in your favor, transforming your testimony into a beacon of hope for others who walk through similar valleys. Trust His timing. Trust His justice. Trust His heart for you. Because the God who sees every hidden tear is also the God who holds every promised victory. And He's not finished with your story yet.